So let's talk about the Nets, who have won 8 games in a row. They're 19-7 under Jacques Vaughn. They're fourth place in the East and climbing based on their momentum right now. Of course, KD and Kyrie are great, and I will talk about them, but I actually want to start with this team's defense, and I do want to start with Ben Simmons. So, going through a bunch of their recent games, allow me to give you a list of players that Ben Simmons has started possessions on. Jordan Poole, Jaden Ivey, Scotty Barnes, Fred VanVleet, Isaiah Stewart, Marvin Bagley, Giannis, Clint Capella, and Okongwu. Basically, Ben Simmons is guarding anybody. You've got Nick Claxton who's switching on to guards. Ben, of course, is switching all over the place. It's a switch-heavy defense to the point where they're not scared for Kyrie to end up on bigger guys. Like Kyrie had a possession against the Bucks where he stripped Giannis. Against the Raptors, there were some possessions where Kyrie switched on to Siakam. Also, shout out to Claxton for getting a breakaway dunk when Kyrie stole it from Giannis. And then, of course, between TJ Warren, Royce O'Neal, Joe Harris, Seth Curry, pretty comfortable with their switches. And, off ball, they might go around screens a little bit more often. But yeah, the foundation is switching. Also, another shout out to Claxton. In that Hornets game they had a little bit ago, he had one possession where he switched onto Rozier. And you could tell that Rozier was really trying to cook him. And then he was like, oh crap, I can't get by this guy. He had to shoot like a tough step back three. That was in the fourth quarter. That was a big possession. In terms of help defense, they are staying home on shooters more than the average team, I would say. I mean, they're still helping. Like they're willing to bring their guys to like the elbows and stuff to cut off drives a little bit, but they're not super duper aggressively helping either. Like I think during this stretch, they're giving up the 7th least amount of 3-point attempts in the league. And I do think it tracks when you watch them. Now, there are some fears with switching. One, of course, is, again, you have smaller guys defending bigger guys. But again, they're willing to explore those waters. And maybe they're going to help a little more aggressively if they have to in those situations. Sometimes if you switch, it actually gives the guy like a lane to the basket because when you switch, you end up like behind the dude basically. And okay, that's happened a couple times. The other fear is if you do that, then you get killed on the defensive glass because, if Claxton is switching onto a guard and then he's not there to grab rebounds, it can be trouble. Well, they've been 16th in defensive rebounding in their last 10 games. And, when you look at it, it's not rocket science. They just send extra bodies to get boards. And also, shout out to KD, because he's had moments where he's ended up on bigger dudes. Like, when KD has had to be the rim protector, basically, within the switching scheme, and just sometimes he ends up as the guy around the rim. I think he's been good. In their last 10 games, their defensive rating is 11th in the league, and that was all you could have asked for this team to turn it around, right? Anyway, let's get to the offense. So, of course, KD and Kyrie, they make tough shots. We all knew this. The biggest examples of this, like in the Raptors game, of course, Kyrie had the step-back buzzer beater. He had a play before that one where he beats Fred VanVleet in a one-on-one. In the Pistons game, KD had 3 straight pull-up threes at the end of the third quarter. I remember a ridiculous fadeaway that Kyrie had over Bojan in that game. In their win against the Hornets, KD and Kyrie traded possessions screening for each other because the Hornets, they weren't just switching it. They were kind of like bringing 2 on the ball and then trying to get back. So you had KD hit a pick-and-pop 3, and then they both got easy mid-rangers screening for each other as well. And just one more quick thing on KD, and then I'll talk about everybody else on offense. So this is the most efficient that KD has ever been. It's not his highest point total, but it's basically tied with his highest point totals. You could argue this is his best regular season through 32 games he's ever had. I mean, he's shooting 57% from mid-range. Like, what the hell is that? Now, to Jacques Vaughn's credit, I don't think he's just asking those guys to do everything. Sure, there's some possessions where it just becomes ISO or pick and roll for those guys, let them go to work. But, they're running some decent amounts of handoff actions or just off-ball stuff for those guys, stagger screens, down screens. I mentioned how they screened for each other in that Hornets game. I think there's been some moments with KD in the post and then like cut actions around him as well. Now let's get to everybody else on offense. So with Ben, brings the ball up a lot of the time in the half court, and they find Ben a lot in transition. He's setting screens in the half court. At the beginning of the season, I was like, Ben Simmons needs to look to score more and all that. And he's had some more moments of just, I've got a lane to the basket, let me go for it. He's a positive piece for the team. Remember earlier in the season where there was that thing about Simmons and Claxton together, the spacing is bad? It's flipped the other way, man. And I think some of it is like, there's been some plays where those two have screened for KD at the same time if he's like coming around something. Or maybe like Claxton will screen and then Ben will be in the opposite dunker spot. Like there's been some more tinkering with that to just not have them be in the way of each other, basically. It certainly doesn't hurt when you're able to get more stops when both of them are in the game as well. I do want to get to like TJ Warren and Royce and Watanabe and stuff, but to mention Claxton a little bit, he's been tinkering with a hook shot a little bit. He had 2 hook shots over Giannis in the post. I think they were even back-to-back, actually. As I've gone through a lot of their games, like he's had a few more of those moments. He's had some times where he's like running a handoff action with somebody and he'll dribble to them as opposed to just staying there, because that was a big question with Claxton. It was like, okay, we know you can finish at the rim, we know you can roll, but do you have anything in the post? Can you do something off the dribble if you have to? And I think he's progressing. To stretch this out to everybody else now, so like you look at the Raptors game, right? Like Watanabe, of course, has that huge three where Kyrie is just being swarmed by like 3 Raptors at the paint. Kicks it to Watanabe, makes the 3. We love that. There was also a play like right before that one where I think KD was trapped. He swings it to Watanabe in the corner, and then Yuta goes off the dribble, and then he finds Ben in the dunker spot. They've had plays where, like against the Hawks, there was one where I think, again, it was KD trapped, swings it to, I think it was Joe Harris, 2 dribbles. He then swings it to Royce O'Neal in the opposite corner. Royce swings it to KD, open 3, it goes in. TJ Warren had a turnaround jumper over Javon Carter against the Bucks. I believe there was a big bucket he had against the Raptors where they were trapping KD, and then TJ got to the middle of the floor and made like a runner on him. So the Nets are looking good. I think the next thing to wonder is, what could they add to this team that makes sense? So at one point I made an offhand comment about like they could use another center. And when I think about that now, I'm a little less sure of that now just because of their switching defense. And it's like, well, they could look for another center who's comfortable switching, or maybe they would want to get a 5 who would allow them to not just be a switch-heavy team, or maybe they would want to get like a big forward who could fit into that and just add another guy who can be switching around everything. The problem for them is that their draft pick situation is, to put it lightly, a complete mess in terms of looking at all their protections, and that'll make it tougher to make moves. As far as players, I mean, for one, Cam Thomas and Daron Sharp, just for the sake of, you guys want some young players as sweeteners for any sort of a move, okay? And the other thing is, well, you look at Joe Harris, and he was involved in, do I call them rumors? I don't know, earlier. He was attached to John Collins a little bit. Hawks were not interested in that. That pretty much died there, but yeah, again, they're not loaded with trade assets, so we'll see if they can manage anything.